You have to understand, after 15 years driving the same routes for the City Transit Authority, your brain just kind of shuts off. It's a good thing, mostly. You don't want to be overthinking every turn, every stoplight, when you're wrestling a 40-foot, 12-ton box of steel through evening traffic. The job becomes muscle memory. The hiss of the air brakes, the groan of the chassis as it kneels at a stop, the rhythmic slap 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 of the windshield wipers. It's a kind of meditation. A noisy, grimy, exhaust-fumed meditation, but still. My name's Tom. I'm in my 40s, with a bit more gray at the temples than I'd like and a permanent crick in my lower back from the driver's seat. That night, I was on my last run. The 11B, the Graveyard Express, as some of us called it. It snakes out from the downtown core, through the deserted business district, and finally dies at the depot on the industrial edge of the city. By 11 p.m., it's mostly just me and the ghosts. And the rain. It was that kind of persistent, miserable Seattle drizzle that isn't heavy enough to be a real storm but soaks everything in a permanent layer of damp. The streets were slick and black, reflecting the buttery, sick yellow glow of the sodium streetlights. Every red light was a smeary watercolor painting on my windshield. The wipers were working hard, their rhythmic thud being the night's only real heartbeat. Thud squeak, thud squeak. I liked it, honestly. It was peaceful. The chaos of rush hour was a distant memory. The bus was empty, warm, and familiar. I knew every rattle, every squeal. The shudder when the transmission shifted gears felt like an old dog sighing in its sleep. The smell of wet rubber mats and stale air freshener was the smell of my office. It was a predictable world, a safe world. There were no surprises on the last run of the 11B. Ever. I was maybe 3 stops from the depot. We were rolling through the warehouse district now, block after block of faceless brick buildings with dark, empty windows. No apartments, no late-night diners. Just loading docks and chain-link fences. I usually blew right through these last few stops. Nobody ever got on or off out here, except tonight. Up ahead, huddled under the flimsy plexiglass of a graffiti-scarred bus shelter, was a figure. A silhouette against the rain-streaked light behind it. I felt a flicker of annoyance, not gonna lie. It just meant prolonging the inevitable, pushing back the moment I could finally clock out and go home. But a fare's a fare. I eased my foot off the accelerator, and the bus sighed as it slowed. The air brakes hissed and the bus knelt with that familiar hydraulic groan, its doors folding open with a soft pneumatic puff. He stepped on. The first thing that struck me was how utterly normal he was. Maybe late 30s, early 40s. Dressed in office clothes, gray slacks, light blue button-down shirt that was a little damp at the shoulders. No briefcase, no bag. Just him. He looked like any one of 1,000 anonymous guys you see downtown every day, the ones who work in cubicles under fluorescent lights. He didn't make eye contact. Most people, they'll give you a nod, hey, a tired smile. Something. Not this guy. His eyes were fixed on the fare box like it was the most important thing in the world. He raised his hand, and this is the second thing that was just a little off. He wasn't fumbling for change. His hand was already open, palm flat, and sitting there were a dollar bill and the exact 2 quarters needed for the fare. Pre-counted, prepared. It's a small thing, I know, but after years of watching people dig through pockets and purses, spilling pennies all over the floor, the efficiency of it was unusual. He didn't say a word, just fed the bill into the slot and dropped the coins in. They made a crisp, lonely clink-clank in the otherwise silent bus. Then he walked past me. I got a faint whiff of rain and something else, something sterile, like unscented soap. He didn't glance at the empty priority seats up front. He just kept walking, his soft-soled shoes making almost no sound on the rubber flooring. His pace was steady, unhurried, all the way to the very last row of seats at the back of the bus. He sat down, not by a window, but in the middle of the bench seat, and disappeared into the shadows. The lights in the back half of the bus were always dimmer. It saves a little power, and honestly, there's rarely anyone back there to need them. From my big, curved rearview mirror, all I could see was a dark shape against the slightly less dark shape of the seat. I closed the doors. They hissed shut, sealing us inside together. I pulled away from the curb, the big diesel engine rumbling as we got back up to speed. For a minute, I just drove. The routine took over. Check the mirrors, watch the road, listen to the wipers. Thud squeak, thud squeak. But my brain wasn't shutting off this time. Tough day at the office, I mumbled to myself, trying to give the guy a story. Maybe he got into a huge fight with his boss. Maybe he got fired. Maybe he just found out his wife was leaving him. It would explain the 1,000-yard stare, the silence. People handle bad news in different ways. Some people cry, some people get angry, some people just switch off. I drove another 4, maybe 5 blocks. The warehouses got bigger, the streetlights farther apart. We were in the real dead zone now. I glanced up at the rearview mirror again. He hadn't moved, and I mean, he hadn't moved an inch. You know how people are on a bus. Even when they're trying to be still, they're not. They'll shift their weight when the bus turns. Their head will nod a little with the bumps in the road. They'll look out the window or down at their phone, or even just stare into space. There's always some small, human motion. There was none from him. He was a statue, a silhouette of a man sitting perfectly upright, head bowed just slightly, facing forward. The bus swayed around a wide turn, its frame groaning, and his shape remained utterly, unnaturally rigid. He didn't look out the window at the passing desolation. He wasn't dozing. He was just there, a fixed point of darkness in my mirror. I told myself I was being stupid. The guy's exhausted. That's all. I'm exhausted. The rain and the late hour are making me jumpy. It's nothing. There's nothing weird about a tired man sitting still on a bus. But was he tired? Tired people slump. Their heads lean against the window. Their shoulders droop. This guy was sitting with a kind of stiff-backed posture, like a soldier at attention, but with his head bowed. It wasn't the posture of sleep. It was the posture of waiting. The thud squeak of the wipers was starting to get on my nerves. Each slap of the rubber against the glass felt a little louder, a little more insistent. The familiar, comforting sounds of my bus were starting to sound different. The low rumble of the engine felt less like a reassuring purr and more like a low growl. The space, which moments ago had felt like my safe, personal kingdom, now felt cavernous and exposed. And I was acutely aware that we were alone in it, me and the statue in the back. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. My palms felt a little damp. I kept my eyes on the road, but my attention was almost entirely on that little rectangular mirror above my head. On the dark, motionless shape within it. Just tired, I said again. This time my voice was a little shaky, a little too loud in the empty bus. Come on, Tom, get a grip. He's just a passenger, a weird passenger, sure, but that's it. In 10 minutes you'll be at the depot, you'll shut the bus down, and he'll get off and walk wherever it is he's going. End of story. But the depot wasn't a residential area. It was a massive, fenced-in yard for city vehicles. Warehouses on one side, a rail line on the other. Where in God's name would he be going from there, on foot, at this hour, in the rain? The thought hung in the air, cold and heavy. I looked in the mirror one last time. The head was still bowed. The shoulders were still ramrod straight. The shadow had not moved, had not shifted, had not given any sign that it was occupied by a living, breathing human being. He was just an object that had been placed at the back of my bus. An overwhelming, primal part of my brain screamed that something was wrong. But I pushed it down. I was a bus driver, a professional, and this was just the last run of the night. It was absolutely, completely normal. So why did my back feel so cold? Why did the tiny hairs on my arms suddenly feel like they were standing on end? The thing is, you try to talk yourself out of feelings like that. You have to, or you'd go crazy in a job like this. My brain, the logical part that's been driving this route for 15 years, started making a list. He's tired. He's had a terrible day. He's sleeping with his eyes open, maybe. He's just weird. A lot of people are weird. All of these were perfectly reasonable explanations. But the part of your brain that's older, the part that lived in caves and listened for snapping twigs in the dark, that part was screaming at me. It didn't have a list. It just had one word: wrong. The bus trundled on. We were coming up on the Jensen Street stop, which wasn't even a real stop. It was just a signpost next to a darkened fire hydrant. Nobody ever used it. As a matter of habit, I slowed slightly, flicking my eyes from the road to the side mirror, then to the big rearview mirror inside. The road was empty, the sidewalk was empty, and the man in the back of my bus was a statue. This was my first real test. A normal passenger, even one who was zonked out, would have stirred. The deceleration, the subtle change in the engine's pitch, the way the whole frame of the bus leans into a slight stop. It's a language your body understands even when you're asleep. You shift, your head lolls. Something. He didn't. I kept rolling past the signpost. Now we were in the real guts of the industrial park. The warehouses here weren't just brick buildings. They were monolithic concrete slabs with no windows, just huge, corrugated steel bay doors that looked like giant, sealed mouths. The streetlights were fewer and farther between now, casting long, distorted shadows that made the road feel like a tunnel. My bus was the only thing moving in this whole dead world. The only thing, except for whatever was in the back. I started doing things to prove to myself that everything was fine. I adjusted my seat, making a loud creak with the leather. I cleared my throat, a loud, gravelly sound that echoed in the empty space. I fiddled with the temperature controls, and the fans kicked on with a low hum. I was making noise. I was trying to provoke a reaction. A cough, a shifting of feet, anything to prove there was a normal human being back there. Nothing. The silence from the back seat was so complete, it felt like it was absorbing the sounds I was making. It was a dense, heavy silence. A weighted blanket of pure quiet. My rational brain made another attempt. Okay, Tom, I thought, he's probably wearing headphones. The noise-canceling kind. Can't hear a thing. It was a good explanation. It made sense. A guy zoning out to his music on the last bus home. Except, I hadn't seen any wires when he got on. And his hands, the one time I saw them, were empty. And his head wasn't bobbing to any rhythm. His head was still bowed at that same, perfect, unnatural angle. We approached the next stop, Core Alloys Industrial. Another ghost stop. This time, I didn't just slow down. I watched him in the mirror the whole way. I watched his silhouette as the bus turned slightly, a motion that should have thrown him against the side of his seat, just an inch or two. I saw the bus turn, but his shape, his dark outline, seemed to defy physics. It stayed perfectly centered, perfectly still. It was like he was bolted to the floor. That's when the first real spike of ice-cold fear shot through my gut. This wasn't natural. Drunk people sway, sick people slump, tired people twitch, people listening to music tap their feet, living people move. This thing, whatever it was, didn't. My hand, slick with a sudden sweat, reached for the radio handset. Company policy was you only used it for emergencies, but I figured a check-in couldn't hurt. Dispatch, this is bus 734, on the 11B route. Just doing a radio check before I hit the depot. How you read? I lifted the handset to my ear, my eyes still darting between the wet road and the mirror. Case shish. Static. A loud, frying hiss. Nothing else. Dispatch, this is 734, do you copy? I said, my voice a little tighter this time. Cache pop HSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSssssss. The big metal buildings could mess with the signal. But tonight, it felt different. The static wasn't just a technical problem. It felt like the sound of my last link to the outside world being severed. The crackle and hiss just carved out the silence from the back of the bus, made it feel deeper, more intentional. I slammed the handset back into its cradle with a loud clatter. The man in the back didn't flinch. Okay, that was it. My rational brain finally threw in the towel and joined the caveman brain in the panic room. I was officially scared. My heart was doing a frantic, thumping rhythm against my ribs that was completely out of sync with the steady thud squeak of the wipers. My mind started racing, cycling through a new list of possibilities, and none of them were good. He wasn't a passenger. He was something else. Was he sick? Dying? Did he get on my bus to just die? The image was horrifying, but it still didn't fit. His posture wasn't one of collapse, it was one of readiness. Of tension. So he wasn't dying, he was waiting. That thought was the worst one yet. Waiting for what? For me to get to the depot. To that big, empty, fenced-in yard with its one sleepy security guard who was probably half asleep in his little shack by the gate. Waiting for me to shut down the engine, turn off the lights, and be completely alone with him in a 12-ton metal box with only one door. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The slick, worn plastic felt like the only solid thing in the universe. I could feel his presence back there. It was more than just seeing him in the mirror. It was a feeling, a weight in the air, like the pressure in the atmosphere before a lightning strike. The bus no longer felt like my office, my little kingdom. It felt like a coffin I was driving to its own grave. I had to do something. I couldn't just keep driving into the trap. But what? Stop the bus in the middle of this deserted street and run for it? And say what? There's a guy sitting really still on my bus? They'd think I was crazy. Confront him? Walk to the back of the bus and ask him what his deal was? The very thought made my blood run cold. The idea of turning my back on the driver's seat, on the controls for the door, on my only way out, it was unthinkable. My eyes were glued to the mirror now. I wasn't even pretending to watch the road anymore. I was just staring at that dark shape, praying for it to move, to do something human. Sneeze, stretch, anything, and as I stared, really stared, locking in on that sliver of my mirror, a new, far more terrifying thought began to form. It started as a tiny little question in the back of my mind. It was about sound. I'd been so focused on the fact that he was so quiet, but I hadn't really thought about what that meant. For the last 15 minutes, since he'd gotten on, I had been in this sealed metal tube with him. I hadn't heard him shift his weight. Not once. I hadn't heard the fabric of his clothes rustle. I hadn't heard him clear his throat. I hadn't heard him sigh. I hadn't heard him sniffle. And then, the final, horrifying realization dropped into my stomach like a block of ice. In a bus that was so quiet I could hear the rain tapping on the roof, I had not for one single second, heard the one sound that every living human being makes, constantly, without thought. I hadn't heard him breathe. The realization wasn't a shout. It was a whisper that crawled up from the lizard part of my brain, the part that had been screaming at me all along. It wasn't just that he was still or silent. It was that in the enclosed, echoing quiet of my bus, I had not, for one single, solitary second, heard him breathe. You know how when you hear a sound you can't place, your brain won't let it go. This was the opposite. My brain was now frantically searching for a sound that wasn't there, and its absence was a roaring klaxon of wrongness. I could hear everything else. The rhythmic th-wump squeak of the wiper blades, a sound so familiar it was part of my own heartbeat. The low, guttural hum of the diesel engine, the soft patter of rain on the metal roof, like a nervous finger tapping. The tiny, almost imperceptible rattle of a loose panel somewhere in the back. I could hear all of it, but from the last row, from the dark shape that was supposed to be a man, there was only a void of sound. No inhale, no exhale, nothing. My blood went cold, not in a metaphorical, I got a chill, kind of way. I mean, I actually felt the warmth drain out of my arms and chest, a physical sensation of icy dread pooling in my stomach. The steering wheel, already slick with sweat, now felt like it was stuck to my palms with freezing glue. Okay, plan. I needed a plan. The depot was now less than a mile away. The depot, a big, fenced-in yard, a single entry gate, and Earl. Good old Earl, a security guard who was probably 70, who spent most of his shift doing crossword puzzles and listening to a crackly AM radio. He was my only hope, and he was about as much use as a screen door on a submarine. The thought of pulling into that dark, empty lot, shutting down the engine, and being plunged into total blackness with this thing, was no longer just a bad thought. It was an impossibility. I couldn't do it. My mind raced. I could stop the bus right here, in the middle of the road. Rip the door open and just run. But run where? Into one of these windowless, concrete warehouses? And what would I tell the cops when they found my abandoned bus? There was a guy sitting in the back who wasn't breathing, officer. They'd look at me like I was insane. They'd drug test me for sure. I'd lose my job, 15 years down the drain because of a spooky feeling. No, I couldn't run, not yet. I had to confront it. The thought was terrifying, but the alternative, driving meekly into that dark yard, was worse. But how? I couldn't leave my seat. That much I knew. Leaving my seat meant turning my back on it. It meant giving up control of the door, my only escape route. No, I had to do it from here. My hand trembled as I reached for the PA microphone. It was clipped to the dash, cold and solid. The plan formed, crude and desperate. I'd pull up just before the depot gate, where there was still a streetlight. I'd keep the engine running, keep the doors closed, and I'd use the microphone. My voice, booming through the speakers, would be my weapon. Safe, distant, authoritative. Sir, I'd say. Sir, this is the final stop. You need to get ready to exit the vehicle. Simple, normal, something a bus driver would say. I practiced it in my head. My throat felt like it was full of sand. I cleared it, a loud, ragged sound that seemed to cannonball down the length of the bus and get swallowed by the silence in the back. I flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror. The shape hadn't moved. Of course it hadn't. It was just waiting. We were getting close now. The last long stretch of road before the turn-in for the depot. A dead zone, no buildings, just a chain-link fence on one side separating the road from a dark, overgrown field, and a concrete retaining wall on the other. It was the darkest part of the whole route. The bus's headlights cut a lonely, moving tunnel through the night. The rain was coming down a little harder now, smearing the view. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. My heart was a frantic drummer in my chest. I reached for the microphone, my fingers closing around the cool plastic of the talk button. My thumb hovered over it. Just a few more yards. I'd pull over by that last streetlight, right before the gate. That's when it happened. Ting! The sound was so sharp, so loud and the humming quiet, that I physically flinched. It was the bell, the pull cord signal for requesting a stop. It sliced through the air like a shard of ice. For a second, I just stared. My brain refused to process it. On the console above my head, a small red sign lit up with the word, "Stop." It glowed with a fierce, unnatural intensity in the gloom of the cabin. I looked out the windshield. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, just the wet, empty road, the fence, and the dark field. There wasn't a stop here. There hadn't been a stop here in the 30 years this route had existed. This was a kilometer-long stretch of nothing. My blood, which had been cold before, now felt like it had stopped moving altogether. This changed everything. This wasn't passive stillness anymore. This wasn't some weirdo sleeping or a sick person collapsing. This was an action, a deliberate, calculated, impossible action. He had pulled the cord. He had requested a stop. Here, in the middle of nowhere. Why? The question hammered at me, drowning out the engine, the rain, everything. Why would you ring the bell here? It made no sense. It was a move in a game where I didn't even know the rules. It was a declaration. I am here, I am in control, and now you will do what I want. The terror I felt before was a vague, shadowy thing. This was new. This was a sharp, specific, ice pick of fear, aimed right at me. He was playing with me. My training, the 15 years of muscle memory, kicked in before my terrified brain could stop it. A stop is requested, you pull over. That's the job. My foot eased off the accelerator. The bus began to slow, its air brakes hissing softly. I steered it toward the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching on the loose stones. I brought the 12-ton machine to a full stop right there, in the darkest part of the road, the headlights illuminating a few dozen feet of rain-swept asphalt and a dripping fence. The only other light was that angry red, "Stop," sign reflected in my windshield. I sat there, my whole body rigid. The engine idled, a low thrum that was the only thing keeping the crushing silence at bay. My plan to use the PA system felt stupid and childish now. He'd already made his move. It was my turn. My hand was shaking so badly I had to grip the microphone with both hands to hold it steady. I lifted it to my mouth. I licked my lips, tasting salt and fear. I pressed the button. The small click of the speaker system engaging sounded like a gunshot. This is the end of the line," I managed to say. My voice came out as a reedy, pathetic croak through the speakers. I cleared my throat and tried again, forcing some authority into it. "Ben Kuoi Roya," I said, the Vietnamese phrase for "last stop," slipping out, a relic of my parents, a phrase I hadn't used in years but that my panicked mind dredged up from somewhere. Toi Ben Roy, last stop. Silence. Not just any silence. It was the same deep, sound-absorbing vacuum as before. The rain drummed on the roof. The engine rumbled beneath my feet. But from the back, from him, there was nothing. No sound of movement. No jacket rustling as he stood up. No footsteps on the rubberized floor. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, to that sliver of it that showed the back row. The shape was still there. I think. It was so dark. "Sir?" I said into the microphone, my voice cracking. "Did you hear me? This is your stop. You need to get off the bus now." The silence that answered was a physical thing. It pressed in on me. It felt mocking. He rang the bell. I stopped the bus. Now what? Was I supposed to go back there? Was that the game? Force me to leave my seat, to walk the length of this metal tube into the darkness where he was waiting? No, no way in hell. A new kind of feeling rose up in me then, pushing past the fear. It was anger, a hot, defiant rage. Who the hell was this guy? What right did he have to do this, to turn my bus, my office, into his own personal little torture chamber? "All right," I said, my voice low and hard, not into the mic this time, but just to myself. "Fine, we'll wait." I took my foot off the brake, my hand moving towards the gear shift. I'd just drive off. Screw him. Let him ride the bus all the way into the depot. Earl, the security guard, had a phone. We'd call the cops from there. Let them handle this freak. But as my hand touched the gear selector, I stopped. What if that's what he wanted? What if the bell wasn't a request to get off here, but a test? A way to see what I would do. If I drove on, what happened then? Did he finally make his move when we were rolling? The image of him advancing up the aisle while I was trying to drive, no. That was worse. I was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. I decided on a new course of action, a final, desperate bluff. I would act like everything was normal. I followed the final stop procedure. I reached up and killed the engine. The sudden silence was shocking. The deep rumble I'd been living with for the last 10 hours was just gone. Now the only sound was the rain, lonely, persistent tapping. In that silence, the glowing red stop sign seemed to hum, to pulse with a life of its own. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I made a show of gathering my thermos and my lunchbox. Normal end of shift movements. Then, slowly, deliberately, I swiveled in my seat. I didn't stand up. I just turned my whole body to face the interior of the bus. It was empty. My eyes scanned from the front to the back, row by row. Every worn, vinyl seat was vacant. The aisle was clear. My gaze snapped to the last row, the one tucked into the shadows at the very back. It was completely, utterly empty. He was gone. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me sick. He was gone. He must have slipped out when I was looking away, somehow. But that made no sense. The relief curdled back into confusion, then into a new, sharper fear. The door had been closed the entire time. I controlled it. I never opened it. The windows were all sealed shut, the old kind you needed a special key to unlock. There was no way out. My heart hammered against my ribs. Where did he go? How did he go? It was then that my eyes, darting wildly around the empty bus, landed again on the console above the windshield. The red stop sign was still lit. My brain did a thing it does when it can't process two contradictory facts at once. It just stalled. Fact 1, the man was gone. Fact 2, there was no way for him to be gone. The two ideas banged against each other in my skull, making a kind of dull, buzzing noise that drowned out everything else for a second. The bus was a tomb. My tomb. For 10 hours a day, this was my world. I knew every rattle, every groan, every patch of worn-out vinyl on the back of every seat. The front door hissed open when I hit the switch. The back door, a little slower, groaned open when I hit another. Both were closed. Both were under my direct control. I hadn't touched the switches. The windows, the old-school sliding kind, were all locked shut. You needed a special 4-pronged key for them, a little metal star that was, at this very moment, jangling in my pocket with my house keys. So, how? You know, when something truly impossible happens, your first instinct isn't always terror. It's annoyance. It's a deep, profound sense of being personally inconvenienced by a tear in the fabric of reality. My brain, desperate for an explanation that didn't involve ghosts or teleportation, latched onto the only one it could find. I was losing my mind. That was it. I was just exhausted. 15 years of this, the late shifts, the fumes, the endless parade of faces you forget the second they step off the curb. It had finally broken something in my head. Maybe there was never a man at all. Maybe I just hallucinated him, a phantom cooked up by a tired mind. It was a comforting thought. I wanted to believe it. I really, really did. But the light was still on. Above my head, the little red sign still glowed, stop. That light wasn't a hallucination. It was a fact, a stubborn, glowing, red fact. It was a witness to the bell, and the bell was a witness to the hand that pulled the cord. Someone, or something, had requested a stop. Someone had been back there. I sat there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds, just staring at that light reflected in my big, dark windshield. It was like an accusation. Well, you stopped. Now what? You gonna sit here all night? A job is a job. Even when things get weird. The final step of my shift, after killing the engine, was to do a walkthrough. Check for any trash people left behind, any lost wallets or umbrellas. And, if a light was on, to turn it off. It was muscle memory. It was protocol. So, I did what I had to do. I grabbed the cold metal bar beside my seat and pulled myself up. My legs felt stiff, unsteady. The simple act of standing up felt like a monumental decision. The safety of my little cockpit, with my hands inches from the door control and the ignition, was gone. I was now on the stage. I took my first step down the aisle. The sound of my own work boots on the ribbed rubber floor sounded deafening in the silence. Clomp, clomp. The only other sound was the rain, a gentle, relentless drumming on the metal roof. It was a lonely sound. The bus seemed longer than usual, stretched out and distorted in the gloom. The only light came from that one angry red sign at the front, casting long, strange shadows that made the empty seats look like crouching figures. My eyes kept darting to the back row, the place he was supposed to have been. It was just a black hole, a pocket of deeper darkness at the far end of the bus. I passed the 5th row, then the 6th. That's when I felt it. It was a draft, a small but definite stream of cold, wet air hitting the side of my face and the back of my neck. It was out of place. This bus, when it was all buttoned up, was a stuffy, sealed container. You didn't get drafts. My steps slowed. I looked around, confused. Where was it coming from? I scanned the windows on my left, then my right. All sealed tight, rain streaming down the outside. It wasn't coming from them. The draft was coming from above. I looked up, and there it was. The answer, the solution to the whole impossible puzzle. Right above the last row of seats, there was a small, square emergency hatch in the ceiling. It was maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. I hadn't thought about that hatch in years. It was one of those things you see on the first day of training and then immediately forget exists. It was for rollovers, for fires. It hadn't been opened in the entire decade and a half I'd driven this bus. But it was open now. Just a crack, a dark, jagged line against the slightly less dark ceiling. One corner of it was bent, pried upwards. A wave of relief, so powerful and sudden it almost made me laugh out loud, washed over me. The knot in my stomach didn't just loosen, it dissolved. It all made sense. Of course, he wasn't a ghost. He was just some wiry kid, some punk just agile enough to climb up on the seat back, force the old, rusted hatch, and squeeze his way out onto the roof and drop to the ground while I was fumbling with the microphone and staring into my mirror. That explained everything. The weirdness, the silence, the impossible disappearance. It was just a stupid, elaborate, and frankly impressive way to dodge a $2 fare. I felt like an idiot. Here I was, scaring myself half to death over some teenage fare jumper. My heart rate started to come back down from the stratosphere. I shook my head, a small, wry smile on my face. Kids these days. I finally reached the back of the bus, the feeling of foolishness now replacing the fear entirely. The cold draft from the open hatch was a welcome, real-world sensation. All I had to do was reset the stop signal and I could get out of here, go home, and sleep for a week. The reset for the rear bell was a small, unassuming black button on the wall panel, right next to the last seat. It was flush with the wall, designed so people couldn't accidentally lean on it. I reached out, my finger finding the familiar smooth plastic. And that's when I heard it. It wasn't the rain. It wasn't the bus groaning. It wasn't my own breathing. Click. It was a tiny sound. A dry, mechanical click. It was so quiet that if the engine had been running, I never would have heard it. But in the dead silence of the bus, it was as loud as a gunshot. And it came from directly beneath me. From the dark, cramped space under the last row of seats. My finger, an inch from the reset button, froze. My entire body went rigid. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. That wasn't the sound of something shifting or settling. It wasn't a rat or a loose piece of metal. It was a clean, precise, man-made sound. The sound of a mechanism. The sound of a latch engaging. Or a blade locking into place. Suddenly, every piece of the puzzle that I thought I'd solved slammed back together in a new, horrifying configuration. The open hatch wasn't an exit. It was a decoy. It was a brilliant, simple piece of misdirection. Planted there to make me think exactly what I had just been thinking. To give me a logical explanation, to make me lower my guard, to make me smile at my own foolishness. The bell, it wasn't a request to get off the bus. He never wanted to get off the bus. It was a summons. It was an invitation. It was a lure to draw me out of my seat, away from the controls, away from the only door. The silence. He wasn't gone. He wasn't holding his breath. He had simply moved. While I was squinting into my mirror, focusing on the dark shape of the seat itself, he had slipped silently, impossibly, off the seat and into the darkness beneath it. He hadn't disappeared, he had hidden. The click, it was him. He was there, right there, inches away from my feet, concealed in the shadows of the underseat space, a space I never, ever would have thought to look. He had waited patiently while I went through my whole cycle of fear and confusion and idiotic relief. He had let me walk the entire length of the bus. He had let me turn my back. This whole thing, it was a performance. A carefully staged play, and I had followed the script perfectly. He had rung the bell to make me stop. He had disappeared to make me investigate. He had opened the hatch to make me feel safe. And now, here I was, trapped at the very back of a 12-ton metal box, as far as a person could possibly be from the exit. He was under the seat, waiting for my hand to touch that button, waiting for me to be completely distracted, waiting for me to look up at the hatch one more time. The click hadn't been an accident. It was the signal. It was his way of telling me, now that I was in the trap, that the real show was about to begin. Time doesn't stop in moments like that. I wish it did. It would be a mercy. Instead, it seems to stretch, to pull like taffy, so that 1 second of pure, frozen terror feels like it lasts a lifetime. My finger was hovering over the reset button. My knuckles were white. The universe had shrunk down to the size of that dark, grimy space beneath the back seat of my own bus. The click, my brain, the slow, logical part of it, tried to offer explanations. A rat, a loose bolt finally giving way, the bus settling on its suspension. But the other part of my brain, the ancient, animal part that lives in your spine and tastes the air for predators, it knew. It knew exactly what that sound was. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. It was the sound of a switch being flicked, of a spring being released, of something being made ready. I didn't scream, I didn't jump, I didn't even breathe. I think if I had done any of those things, I wouldn't be here telling you about it. Some deep, primal instinct took over, a survival circuit that bypassed all the panic and noise. It sent a single, clear message through the ice in my veins. He doesn't know that you know. He thinks I'm still the dumb, tired bus driver, annoyed about the open hatch. He thinks I'm distracted, I'm fiddling with the bell reset. My back is to him. This is his moment, the moment he's been waiting for. The click was a mistake, a tiny miscalculation in his perfect little play, and it was the only advantage I had. So, I acted. My hand, which was frozen in midair, completed its journey. I pressed my finger against the small, black reset button. I kept pressing it, even after nothing happened. I let out a low groan of frustration, a sound I've made 1,000 times on this job. It was the most convincing performance of my life. "Ah, come on," I muttered, my voice sounding shaky and thin in the silence. I made it sound like I was talking to the bus. Not again. I jiggled the button. I tapped the panel around it with my knuckles, a pantomime of weary annoyance. Inside, my heart was a hammering piston, trying to break its way out of my ribcage. Every nerve ending was screaming at me to turn around, to run, to do something. But the survival instinct held firm. Play the part, sell the lie. He was under the seat. A few feet away, I could feel his presence like a patch of cold. Was he holding his breath? Was he slowly, silently sliding out from his hiding spot, a knife or God knows what in his hand? The open hatch was a lie. The bell was a lie. It was all a trap. And the only way out of a trap is to pretend you don't see the jaws. "Piece of junk," I said, a little louder this time. I gave the panel one last, theatrical slap. Then, I turned around. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. To turn my back completely on that dark space, to deliberately move away from it, was against every fiber of my being. I didn't turn quickly. I did it slowly, with the tired sigh of a man at the end of a long, thankless shift. My eyes were fixed forward, down the long, dark aisle of the bus. I refused to let them flicker down to the floor, to the space under the seat. I didn't want to see a hand, a shoe, a shadow moving where it shouldn't be. If I saw it, I would break. I knew I would. My plan formed in that half second of turning. It wasn't a brilliant plan. It was a desperate one. I needed a reason to walk the entire length of the bus. A reason to get back to my cabin. Back to the door controls. "Guess I need the short tool," I grumbled to the empty rows of seats. I started walking. My legs felt like they were dredged in cement. Each step was a monumental effort of will. The rubber on the floor seemed to grab at the soles of my work boots, trying to hold me back. Clomp, clomp. The sound was a cannonade in the silence. Too loud. Was it too loud? Did it sound like a man walking, or a man running away? I focused on keeping my pace even, casual, the same pace I used every night to check for lost umbrellas. The bus seemed to go on forever. The driver's seat, with its comforting proximity to the exit, looked a million miles away, a distant sanctuary on the other side of an ocean of shadows. The rows of seats passed by me in a blur. Each one seemed to hold a figure in my peripheral vision, a trick of the dim light that made my heart leap into my throat again and again. 10 rows to go. Just keep walking. Don't look back. I could feel him behind me. I couldn't see him, couldn't hear him, but I could feel his attention on my back like a physical weight. I imagined him sliding out from under the seat, rising silently to his feet. I pictured him taking his first step, matching his pace to mine, a silent shadow stalking me down the aisle. The air grew thick, heavy. I was walking through water. 8 rows. Normal. You're just a driver. You're going to get a tool. The rain was the only other sound, a steady, rhythmic drumming on the roof. It was a countdown, a beat for this horrible, silent dance. My own breathing was ragged. I tried to control it, to make it sound normal, but it came in short, panicked gasps. He had to hear it. He had to know. 6 rows. He's right behind me. I know he is. The urge to glance at the long, curved mirror above the windshield was almost unbearable. It would show me everything. It would confirm my worst fears. But if I looked, and our eyes met in that reflection, the play would be over. The pretense would be shattered. And then whatever was going to happen would happen right here, in the middle of the aisle, far from the door. 4 rows. Almost there. Don't speed up. Don't do it. My hand was already reaching out, my muscles tensing to bolt. I could see the handle of the door, the big red emergency release button next to my seat. It glowed faintly, a promise of escape. My little driver's cockpit was right there. Safety. I cleared the last row of passenger seats and stepped into my designated space. I didn't go for my toolbox. There was no time for that. There was no more acting. The moment my foot hit the slightly raised platform of the driver's area, the survival instinct screamed one final command: go. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look back. My left hand shot out and slammed into the emergency door release button with all the force I could muster. It wasn't the normal switch, it was the one that bypassed the safety interlocks, the one you use for a fire. There was a loud, explosive hiss of compressed air, a sound 100 times more violent than the normal door opening. The bifold doors blew open, swinging with a shuddering crash against their stoppers. Cold night air and the smell of rain flooded the bus. I didn't run, I launched myself. I threw my body through the opening, hit the wet asphalt with my shoulder and hip, and scrambled. The hard ground scraped my hands raw, tore a hole in the knee of my pants. I didn't feel a thing. The pain was distant, unimportant. I was on my feet in a second, fueled by a surge of pure, undiluted adrenaline that felt like electricity in my blood. And then I ran. I ran like I hadn't run since I was a kid. I ran with my head down, my arms pumping, my lungs burning. The guard shack at the entrance to the depot was maybe 50 yards away, its single yellow light a blurry, welcoming beacon in the downpour. 50 yards. It might as well have been a mile. My feet slapped against the puddles, sending up cold sprays of water. My breath came out in huge, sobbing gasps. The only thought in my head was get to the light, get to the light, get to the light. I didn't dare look back. I was too afraid of what I might see. A figure framed in the doorway of the bus? A shape running after me, gaining on me? Or worse, nothing at all. The not knowing was its own special kind of terror. I was halfway there, maybe 30 yards from the shack, when I heard it. It wasn't a footstep. It wasn't a yell. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. A sound that was completely, utterly wrong. Over the drumming of the rain and the frantic pounding of my own heart, I heard a soft, mechanical hiss. It was the sound of the bus's pneumatic system re-engaging, and it was followed, a second later, by a heavy, final thump. The sound of the bus door closing itself. I slid to a stop in the dirt, the guard shack's lone floodlight blinding me. I could taste blood and asphalt in my mouth. My hands were on my knees, and I was trying to pull air into lungs that felt like they'd been set on fire. That's when I finally risked a look back. The bus was just sitting there, maybe 100 feet away in the rain. A big, silent, yellow box. The lights were still on inside, casting a sickly, sterile glow through the windows. The door I had blown open and thrown myself out of, was shut. Perfectly, quietly shut. It didn't make any sense. My mind was scrambling, trying to connect dots that weren't there. To close those doors after an emergency release, you have to reset the system. You have to be in the driver's seat. You have to know what you're doing. The door to the shack creaked open. Old George stood there, a half-eaten sandwich in one hand, his face a mask of confusion. "Mike, what in God's name are you doing? You look like you just wrestled a damn garbage truck." I couldn't form a sentence. I just pointed a shaky, scraped-up hand back at the bus. There's someone on the bus, George. Call the cops. He's still on there." George squinted into the rain. "What are you talking about? It's empty. I saw you pull in." "No," I gasped, the word tearing at my throat. "He hid. He was under the seat." "George, listen to me." He just closed the goddamn door. The look on George's face changed. The tired annoyance was gone, replaced by the kind of sharp alertness you see in old men who've worked the graveyard shift their whole lives. He didn't ask another question. He just ducked back inside the shack, and I heard him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. I didn't move. I just stood there in the rain, shivering, my eyes locked on that bus. My bus. For 10 years that vehicle had been my office, my little kingdom, a safe, rumbling bubble against the world. Now it looked like a coffin. A trap. The interior lights made the empty seats look like rows of tombstones. I kept waiting for a shadow to move past a window, for a face to appear in the gloom. Nothing. There was just the steady hum of the diesel engine idling down, and the rain. The next morning felt like a different lifetime. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world that was gray, damp, and cold. My bus was still parked where I'd left it, but now it was wrapped in yellow police tape that fluttered in the morning breeze. 2 patrol cars were parked nearby, their lights off, looking tired. I was sitting in the back of one of them with a thick, scratchy blanket around my shoulders, a styrofoam cup of coffee in my trembling hands. The coffee was awful, but the warmth was the only thing that felt real. A detective got in and sat in the seat facing me. He wasn't like the cops on TV. He was just a guy, maybe my age, early 40s, with tired eyes and a suit that looked like he'd slept in it. He introduced himself as Detective Miller. He had a small notepad. He didn't seem surprised or alarmed or anything. He just looked patient. "So, Mike," he started, his voice quiet. "Let's just go over it one more time, from the top." Nice and slow. And so I did. I told him everything. The quiet passenger getting on near the end of the line. The way he sat in the back, in the dark. The strange stillness. The bell ringing in the middle of nowhere. Me going back to check. The open ceiling hatch. And then the click. I told him how I pretended not to hear it. How I faked my way back to the driver's seat and blew the door. How I ran. And how, when I looked back, the door had closed. "I don't know," I finished, my voice raspy. "Maybe he's just crazy, psychotic." I thought, maybe he wanted to hijack the bus? Or just kill me? I have no idea. Miller listened to the whole thing without interrupting, just making a few notes. When I was done, he clicked his pen shut and looked at me. "You're not crazy, Mike," he said. "And you didn't imagine it. The forensics team found the hatch. It was pried open from the inside, just like you said. They also found scuff marks under the rear bench. Someone was definitely hiding there." A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me dizzy. I wasn't losing my mind. It was real. "But he was gone," I said. "By the time the first patrol car got here, he was gone. He must have slipped out the back emergency exit when I was running to the shack." Miller nodded slowly. "Yeah, he did." He paused, looking out the window at my bus. "Look, we pulled the security footage from the bus stop where he got on. We got a clear shot of his face." My heart jumped. "You know who he is?" "We do," Miller said. "He's not a local psycho, Mike. He's a professional. Name's Alan Rourke. He's a known associate of a crew out of Chicago. They specialize in logistics, warehouses, depots, freight trucks. They hit a depot just like this one down in Ohio about 6 months ago. Got away with over $1 million in electronics." I just stared at him. None of this was computing. It was too big, too organized. It didn't fit with the quiet, terrifying man hiding under a seat. I don't understand," I stammered. "What does that have to do with me? With my bus? What did he want?" And that's when Detective Miller told me. That's when the fear I'd felt last night, that hot, panicked, animal fear, was replaced by something else entirely. Something cold and heavy and far, far worse. "He didn't want you, Mike," Miller said, and his voice was flat, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "He probably never intended to harm you at all. You weren't the target, you were just part of the process. He let that sink in. This crew, their MO is meticulous. They don't just show up and kick down the door. They do surveillance for weeks. They learn patterns. Your route, number 42, is the last one into this depot every night. The man in the shack, George, he's alone from 2 a.m. until the morning shift gets in at 6. They knew all of that. He pointed his pen at the bus. His job last night was simple recon. A dry run. He gets on your bus, he hides. He waits for you to pull into the depot. Then, he initiates a problem. The ringing bell wasn't a signal for him to get off. It was a signal for you to get off. Your seat, that is. My blood ran cold. The click, the open hatch, the bell. It wasn't a rushed, sloppy trap for me. It was a deliberate, calculated test. The plan, Miller continued, was to get you to leave the driver's cabin and walk to the back of the bus. That gives him a clean window. He slips out from under the seat, exits through the rear door you can't see from the front, and melts into the darkness. From a hiding spot outside, he can watch. How long does it take for you to notice something is wrong? How does the guard react? How long until the first police car shows up? He was gathering intelligence, timing the response. I felt sick. I was just a lab rat, a variable in an equation. My terror, my desperate run for my life, it was just a data point for them. The click I heard, the one that saved my life? It was probably just him shifting his weight, a tiny mistake in his otherwise perfect, cold-blooded performance. I finally found my voice. It was a whisper. So, my running, that was a good thing? Miller looked me straight in the eye. For the first time, I saw something other than professional weariness in his face. It was something like pity. Mike, he said, leaning forward a little. You did the only thing that could have saved you. You assumed the worst and you ran. You have no idea how lucky you were. He hesitated, chewing on his lip like he was debating whether to say the next part. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, he said quietly, but I think you need to hear it. This crew tried the same thing about a month ago. Different state, down south. It was a freight truck driver, not a bus driver, pulling into his company's yard for the night. Same situation, last one in, lone security guard. My whole body went rigid. I knew what was coming. They had a guy hide in the sleeper cab of his truck. He made a noise. The driver, he was a former Marine. A big guy. I guess he decided he was going to be a hero. He heard the noise, grabbed a tire iron from his toolbox, and went back to confront whoever was in his cab. Miller stopped. He didn't need to say the rest. The silence in the car was absolute. They found him the next morning, he said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. The guy with the tire iron. They found him in his cab. Rourke and his crew never tried to rob that depot. The test failed. The driver reacted the wrong way, and they had to clean up the mess. They just moved on, found a new target, a new city. He let the words hang in the air between us. The fear I felt now was 1,000 times worse than the blind panic of running through the rain. It wasn't the fear of a monster hiding in the dark. It was the gut-wrenching, soul-freezing horror of what could have been. If I had been a little braver, if I had been a little more stupid, if I had decided to walk back down that aisle and peer under that seat, to see who was there, my story would have ended right there, a footnote in a police report about a botched robbery. I looked past Miller, out the window at my bus. It wasn't my office anymore. It was a stage, a place where a play had been set. And I had broken character. From now on, every time I sat in that seat, every late night run, every time I heard that bell ring in an empty bus, I wouldn't be thinking about the man who was there. I'd be thinking about the man I could have become, another driver, found in the morning.